something quietly extraordinary is happening among women over 65 across America right now, and most people have not noticed it yet. Not on the evening news, not in the conversations happening at family dinner tables across this country, not even in the quiet offices of therapists and counselors and social workers who are supposed to understand these things. Nobody is talking about it in the places where people usually talk about what matters. But the women themselves, they know. They feel it. Some of them discovered it by accident, stumbling into a life they never planned and finding, to their own astonishment, something extraordinary waiting there. Some of them chose it on purpose with clear eyes and clear hearts, knowing exactly what they were stepping into. And some of them were pushed into it by circumstances they never asked for, by loss and change, and the relentless, unscheduled turns that life takes after 65. But here is what is remarkable, and every single one of them, once they settled into it, once the dust cleared and the noise went quiet and the fear began to ease, discovered something they were never, ever supposed to find. They discovered that alone does not mean lonely. They discovered that a house without another person in it can feel more full, more alive, more warm than any house they ever shared. They discovered that a Saturday morning with no one to answer to, no one's preferences to accommodate, no schedule to honor but their own, is not an empty morning. It is, for reasons they are only beginning to understand, the richest morning of their lives. Something is happening among women over 65 all across America. A quiet revolution lived out in the morning routines and the evening silences and the small, private, radical decisions of millions of women who were told their entire lives that this kind of life would be the saddest thing that could ever happen to them. And they are sitting in their living rooms right now, these women, some of them laughing softly to themselves, some of them simply sitting in the particular peace of their own company, because they know something the world has not caught up to yet. This is not sad. This is not lonely. This is not the end of something. This is the best it has ever been. Today, we are going to talk about why, and the data. The data is going to surprise you. There is real research on this. There are studies done by universities and sociologists and psychologists all across this country, and what that research is showing is something that upends every assumption we were handed about what a woman's life is supposed to look like past 65. It challenges what we were told about solitude, about needing someone, about what it means to be alone. And it challenges, most powerfully of all, the very definition of happiness itself. By the end of this video, you will not see living alone the same way. You will not see yourself the same way. And if you are living alone right now, or considering it, or wondering in the quiet hours of the night whether your life somehow turned out wrong, I believe you are going to feel something shift deep inside you today, something settle, something that feels for the first time in perhaps a very long time, like permission and like peace. If this is already speaking to you, I want to invite you to hit that subscribe button right now. I make a brand new video every single week, specifically for women like you, women who are ready for the honest, real, meaningful conversation about their own lives. I do not want you to miss a single one. Now let's get into it. The first thing I want you to know is that the data is real, and it is extraordinary. Let us start with what the research actually says, because I want the numbers to land before anything else. I want the facts to settle into you before we talk about the reasons behind them, because sometimes facts hit differently than feelings, and on this particular subject, the facts are worth sitting with for a moment. A major study conducted by researchers at the University of Michigan asked thousands of women over the age of 65 to rate their overall happiness, their sense of personal freedom, their quality of daily life, and their feelings of purpose and meaning. Say the results split clearly and consistently along one very specific line. Women living independently without a partner in the household rated their happiness higher than women in cohabiting partnerships. Not marginally higher, meaningfully, measurably, consistently higher, in category after category, including freedom over their own daily schedule, quality of sleep, feelings of personal pride and accomplishment, and the sense that their lives were unfolding the way they actually wanted. The women living alone came out ahead. A separate body of research from the AARP and the Stanford Center on Longevity reached similar conclusions. Women over 65 who had been living alone for 2 or more years and who had maintained active social connections and clear daily routines reported higher levels of what psychologists call subjective well-being than any other group in their demographic. Not women in new relationships, not women in long marriages, the women living alone. Now, before we go any further, I need to be absolutely clear about what I am not saying. I am not saying that love is wrong. I am not saying that good, healthy, genuinely fulfilling partnerships do not exist, because they absolutely do. I am not saying that every woman would thrive in solitude, or that every woman who lives alone is automatically happy. That is not what the research says, and it is not what I believe. What I am saying is this. For women over 65 specifically, a living alone is not the tragedy it was always presented as. In fact, the data suggests it is very often the very opposite of a tragedy. And the question that deserves to be asked, the question almost nobody is asking, is why? Why are so many women over 65 reporting genuine happiness, genuine flourishing, genuine joy in lives that the world told them would be defined by loss and emptiness and quiet grief? That is what we are going to explore today, one reason at a time. And I think what you are about to discover will stay with you for a very long time. I spoke with a woman named Carol. She was 71 years old, from Columbus, Ohio. She had been married for 43 years. Her husband passed away 3 years before we spoke. She told me something I have never forgotten. She said, "The first year, I cried every single day. The second year, I started to notice things. The third year, I stopped crying and started living." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I feel guilty saying this out loud, but I am happier right now than I have been since I was 22 years old, and I think I am finally beginning to understand why." Carol is not unusual. She is, according to the research, representative of a pattern playing out in living rooms and kitchen windows and retirement communities all across this country. And today, we are going to understand it together. The first reason the data surprises people is this. For generations, we were measuring the wrong thing entirely. For as long as social scientists have been studying the well-being of women, they measured it by relationship status. Are you married? Do you have a partner? Is there someone at home with you? Those were the questions on every survey, baked into every well-being index, assumed in every psychological study of what a woman over 65 needs to be okay. And those measures were built in an era when women had almost no financial independence, almost no legal standing outside of marriage, almost no social permission to live a life that was not organized around a partner. When you study fish, you measure how well they swim. When you study women who had no real choice but to live in relationships, you measure how well those relationships are going. The measure made a certain kind of sense for its time. But then something changed. Women began to have choices, genuine, real, legal, financial, social choices. The women began to have their own income, their own credit, their own mortgages. And once that happened, the old measures started producing confusing results. Women who were alone were not statistically falling apart. They were statistically doing rather well. Some of them were thriving. The research community started asking a different question, not what does a woman need within a relationship to be happy, but simply what does a woman need to be happy, period. No relationship assumption buried inside the question, just the honest, open inquiry into what actually produces a good life for a woman in her 60s, 70s, and beyond. And the answer turned out to be things that can absolutely be found in a relationship, but are more reliably, more consistently, more fully found in a life you are running yourself. Things like autonomy, things like alignment between your values and how you actually spend your days. Things like the calm, the unbroken satisfaction of knowing that when you make a decision, it is yours. When you succeed at something, you did that. When your home is quiet on a Tuesday evening, that quietness belongs to you completely. Picture this. You wake up on a Sunday morning in October, somewhere in that particular October light that makes everything look like a painting. That golden, amber, early morning quality that comes only in fall. You do not have to be anywhere. You do not have to make breakfast for anyone but yourself. You do not have to manage anyone's mood or schedule or expectations before you have even had your first cup of coffee. You rise when you are ready. You make your coffee exactly the way you like it, the exact strength, the exact temperature, in the exact mug you have always preferred. You sit by the window. Outside, the leaves are turning. The street is quiet. A neighbor's dog is being walked. And for one quiet and extraordinary moment, you feel something so simple and so complete that it takes your breath. You feel like yourself, just yourself, exactly yourself, not someone's wife, not someone's mother, not the woman who manages the household and holds the family together and remembers everyone's appointments and swallows her own preferences to keep the peace. Just a woman in the morning in her own home, entirely herself. You realize you cannot remember the last time you felt that way without any effort at all. That Sunday morning is not a small thing. That Sunday morning is precisely what the research is measuring when it reports that women over 65 living alone are happier. It is the accumulation of Sunday mornings like that one, multiplied by 365, multiplied by years. The second reason is something researchers call identity reclamation, and it is one of the most powerful psychological forces at work in the lives of women over 65 who are living alone, and one of the least understood. Here is what that means. Most women who are now over 65 grew up in an era when a woman's identity was expected to orbit around someone else. First, her parents, specifically her father, then her husband, then her children, then, in many cases, her grandchildren. There was always a gravitational center that was not herself. Her preferences, her dreams, her instincts about how to spend a day, her vision of a life well lived. These were treated, not cruelly but consistently, as secondary concerns. They were folded around the primary concerns of everyone else, accommodated or set aside as the situation required. Now, I want to be careful here. I am not saying the people she loved were selfish or unkind. Sometimes they were, and that is a real and serious conversation worth having. But even in the most loving marriages, even in the warmest families, there is an enormous amount of daily self-erasure that women perform almost automatically, without being asked, without complaint, sometimes without even noticing. What do you want for dinner? What time should we leave? Do you mind if I change this? Can we go somewhere different? Is it okay if I spend the afternoon? These are not dramatic sacrifices. They are small ones. A preference adjusted here, a preference quietly surrendered there. But small surrenders made daily, over decades, accumulate into something significant. They accumulate into a person who has lost fluency in her own wants, who cannot remember, if asked directly, what her ideal Saturday actually looks like, who would feel strange, maybe even a little guilty, designing a day entirely around herself, because that is not what women like her do. That is not what she was raised to do. And then, suddenly, she is alone. And the question becomes, now what? See, the research is clear that women who answer that question by turning inward, by beginning the slow, sometimes uncomfortable, ultimately magnificent work of remembering who they are beneath all the years of accommodation, those women experience what researchers genuinely describe as a psychological renaissance, a reflowering of self, a returning to a woman who was always there but had been living very quietly for a very long time. And this reflowering happens more reliably, more deeply, and more fully in women who are living alone than in women who move quickly from one relationship to another. Because here is the truth that the research confirms. You cannot rediscover yourself while you are still organizing yourself around someone else. The rediscovery requires the space. It requires the quiet. It requires the uncomfortable and eventually beautiful experience of sitting alone in your own kitchen with your own life and asking, perhaps for the first time ever with no one listening and no performance required, who am I now? What do I actually love? What do I believe? What do I want to do with the years I have left? Those are not questions that surface while you are managing a household for two. They are questions that only reveal themselves in solitude. And the women who allow themselves to stay with those questions long enough, who resist the urge to fill the silence with noise and distraction and premature action, who simply sit with the questions and wait for the honest answers. They find something that astonishes them every single time. They find a woman inside themselves who is wiser and more interesting and more genuinely alive than anyone they had been pretending to be. I want to tell you about a woman I will call Margaret. She was 68 years old, living in a small apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. Her marriage had ended after 31 years, and she told me that for the first 6 months of living alone, she felt completely untethered. She said she would stand in the grocery store, paralyzed at the produce section, because she genuinely could not remember what she liked to eat. She had spent so many years buying groceries for someone else's preferences that her own had become a mystery to her. She did not know if she liked broccoli. She could not remember. She did not know if she preferred the window open or the air conditioning on. She had never decided. Someone else had always decided. So she started making a list. Every single day, she would write down one thing she actually wanted, just for her, just one thing, and then she would do that one thing that day. Over the course of a full year, the list became a portrait of a woman she had not known was in there. Margaret loved jazz, it turned out, had always loved it. Her ex-husband found it irritating. So it had disappeared from her life so gradually, she had almost forgotten she missed it. Margaret loved sleeping with the window open, loved it, had always loved it. It had been forbidden for 31 years because her husband felt the cold air. Margaret had wanted for decades to take a painting class, had mentioned it exactly twice, had been brushed off exactly twice, had stopped mentioning it. Within 18 months of living alone, Margaret had a jazz playlist she loved deeply. She attended a studio art class every Thursday evening and was, she told me with obvious pride, not completely terrible. And every single night, regardless of the season, she slept with the window open. She called me one evening to tell me about it. She said, I introduced myself recently to the most interesting person I have ever met, and it was me the whole time. I was right here the whole time. That is identity reclamation. And it is one of the most profound gifts that living alone can offer a woman over 65. Not loss, not loneliness, the recovery of yourself. The third reason has to do with health, and this one genuinely and consistently surprises people, so I want to walk through it carefully. The prevailing assumption is that living alone is bad for your physical health, that loneliness and isolation are serious health risks. And that assumption, in its most extreme form, is not entirely wrong. True isolation, the kind that comes from having no meaningful human connections and no community and no sense of daily purpose, is genuinely hard on the body. The research on the health effects of severe isolation is solid and worth taking seriously. But here is the critical distinction that is changing the entire conversation. Living alone and being lonely are not the same thing. They are not even closely correlated for women over 65 who have active social networks, purposeful daily routines, and a genuine sense of agency over their lives. And when researchers began separating those two things, the data shifted dramatically. Several major health studies, including long-term research from the Nurses' Health Study and research published in the Journal of Health and Social Behavior, found that women in this demographic who live alone but maintain robust social lives show better health outcomes, including better cardiovascular health, lower rates of depression, stronger immune function, and better cognitive scores than women living with a partner in relationships characterized by tension, chronic disappointment, or the low-grade friction of two people who have grown profoundly apart. Let me say that again because it matters. Women over 65 who live alone but stay socially engaged have better health outcomes than women living with a partner in an unhappy or high-friction partnership. Not the same outcomes, better. The reason is biological. The body reads stress. It reads it at the cellular level, through the nervous system and the endocrine system and the immune system. Chronic relational stress, the kind that comes from persistent conflict, from feeling criticized in your own home, from the low-level hum of two people who no longer understand each other very well, but are still sharing space every single day. That stress elevates cortisol. It disrupts sleep. It suppresses the immune response. It contributes to elevated blood pressure. And it does all of this quietly, without dramatic symptoms, just a steady accumulation in the body of years of low-grade tension. Women living alone, in contrast, report in multiple studies that their stress levels dropped meaningfully after leaving or being widowed from relationships that, while not abusive, carried a persistent weight. Their sleep improved significantly. Their blood pressure stabilized. Their energy returned. And many of them report a specific and very physical experience they describe in remarkably similar terms across studies. The feeling of putting down a heavy bag they had been carrying for so long they had forgotten it was there. And then the feeling, standing upright without it, of being somehow taller than they remembered. There is also the simple but powerful factor of having full authority over your own health decisions. Women who live alone schedule their own medical appointments without consulting anyone and without someone else's opinion about whether it is really necessary. They follow the dietary recommendations their doctors give them without negotiating around a partner who wants a different kind of food in the house. They take their walks and attend their exercise classes without feeling guilty for being away. They sleep the hours their body actually requires. They take their medications on the schedules that are right for them. Small freedoms, yes, but freedoms that, compounded over months and years, make a measurable difference in how well a woman ages. The healthiest women over 65, according to the data, are not necessarily the partnered ones. They are the engaged ones, engaged with life, with community, with their own bodies and their own well-being. And engagement, it turns out, does not require a partner. It requires a self. The fourth reason is the one that women almost never say out loud, even to themselves. But it is, according to the research, one of the most significant contributors to the reported happiness of women over 65 who are living independently. And once I name it, I think you will recognize it immediately. It is the peace, not the peace of a cemetery, not the peace of giving up, not the hollow, aching peace of a woman who has simply stopped wanting things. The peace of a home that reflects exactly who you are and no one else. The peace of a morning that belongs entirely to you. The peace of evenings that unfold at exactly your own pace. The peace of walking through your own front door and knowing that everything inside that door, every object, every choice, every sound or silence is an expression of who you are. No one else's clutter accumulating in corners you have cleaned 3 times this week. No one else's television programs filling rooms you would prefer to be quiet. No one else's mood landing in your chest before you have even said good morning. No one else's rhythm imposing itself on yours at 6 in the morning or 11 at night. Just you. Your life. The particular, specific, irreplaceable texture of your day. There is a woman I want to tell you about. I will call her Evelyn. She was 74 years old, living in a small house in Savannah, Georgia. The kind of house with a porch and a garden and morning light that comes in sideways through the live oaks. She had been widowed at 69 after 45 years of marriage. Her husband had been, by her account, a decent and loving man. Not a villain in her story, not someone to be blamed. Just a man whose preferences had shaped the entire texture of their shared life. The way it goes when 2 people live together for 45 years and one of them has a stronger sense of what he wants. Evelyn told me that in her marriage, she had never once, not once, watched whatever she wanted on television without some kind of negotiation. 45 years, every single evening, a negotiation or an accommodation or a quiet surrender. She laughed when she said it, the way you laugh at something that is funny and also not funny at all. And then she got very quiet and she said, "I know it sounds so small, the television, but it wasn't small at all. It was every single evening of my life for 45 years. It was 1,000 surrenders I made so smoothly I stopped knowing I was making them." After her husband passed, she said, it took her almost a full year to stop automatically reaching for the remote to find his programs out of pure habit. She had done it for so long her hands knew the way before her mind did. And then one evening she sat down alone and she picked up the remote. And she chose something she had been wanting to see for years, something she had mentioned twice and been laughed at for, and she watched it in her own living room in the quiet with a glass of sweet tea and a blanket, and no one beside her who was bored or impatient or vaguely disapproving. And she cried, not from sadness, from relief, from the extraordinary simple ordinariness of choosing her own evening. She said, "That was the night I understood something. I had been grieving the marriage. But I was not grieving the life I was building. That life," she said softly, "feels like mine for the very first time. That is the peace the research is measuring, not emptiness, fullness, the fullness of a life that belongs to one clear, specific, wonderful person. You." And before I continue, I just want to say a genuine thank you to everyone who has been sending super thanks on these videos. When you do that, you have no idea how much it means to me and how much it helps me keep making content like this for you. If you ever feel moved to do that, the button is right below this video. But truly, just watching and sharing is more than enough. Now, let's keep going. The 5th reason has to do with friendships. And this is something the research has documented so clearly and so consistently that it deserves its own full conversation. When women over 65 live alone, their friendships get better. Not marginally better. Meaningfully, noticeably, often dramatically better. They go deeper, they become more consistent, they grow more honest and more nourishing. And the reason for this is something sociologists call relational prioritization. When you do not have a partner whose social preferences and schedules and energy levels quietly shape and constrain your social life. You are free to build friendships entirely on your own terms. You can choose the women you love most. You can call when you want to. You can create rituals with them and honor those rituals without asking permission or apologizing for the time they take. You can invest in those friendships the way you invest in a garden, giving them steady, unhurried, loving attention without always factoring in whether someone else at home approves of how much you water the plants. This matters enormously because friendships among women over 65 are one of the strongest single predictors of long-term well-being. Be not just psychological well-being, physical well-being. Women with rich, active, mutually supportive female friendships live longer. They recover from illness faster. They are substantially less likely to experience cognitive decline. They have lower rates of clinical depression. Their immune systems are stronger. The research on female friendship and longevity, when you sit with it, is nothing short of extraordinary. It is, quite literally, a matter of how long you live and how well. And the women who are building the richest friendships right now, the ones the data shows thriving in their health and their happiness decade after decade, are very often the women living alone because they have time, they have energy, they have the emotional spaciousness to really show up for the women they love. I know a group of women, 5 of them, all in their late 60s and early 70s, all living alone in a mid-sized city in the American South. They met in a pottery class 3 years ago. None of them had made pottery before. None of them were particularly crafty. They signed up because the class was on Tuesday evenings and they had a Tuesday evening to fill. They started going to dinner after class at a little Italian restaurant 3 doors down because the class ended at 7:30 and nobody wanted to go home quite yet. Then they started taking road trips together, one a season. Then they started spending Thanksgiving together, pooling dishes in someone's dining room, laughing until the neighbors probably wondered. They call themselves the Tuesday Women now, and every single one of them, when asked, says that these are the deepest friendships of her life. Not the friendships of her 20s when everyone was scrambling to build something. Not the friendships of her 30s and 40s when everyone was too busy and too tired to really show up. The friendships of her late 60s, made in a pottery class on a Tuesday evening, made possible by the particular freedom of a life she was living on her own terms. Not one of them planned to find her closest friends in her late 60s. All of them now say that these friendships are the great love story of their second half. And all of them credit, quietly and consistently, the fact that they were living alone, that they had a Tuesday evening to fill, that they were free. The 6th reason is about money. And I know that finances can feel like a practical digression in the middle of a deeply personal conversation, but it belongs here because the connection between financial independence and emotional well-being is more direct, more profound, and more transformative than most people realize. Research on women over 65 and financial independence consistently shows that women who manage their own finances, their own household budgets, their own Social Security decisions, their own Medicare supplemental coverage, their own retirement savings, their own monthly expenses, and their own credit, report significantly higher feelings of personal competence, self-respect, and sense of agency than women whose finances are managed jointly or entirely by someone else. Not slightly higher, significantly. Some of that is simple logistics. Managing your own money means you always know where it is, what it is doing, and how it is being used. There are no surprises waiting for you. There is no other person's spending patterns creating uncertainty in your life. There is no negotiation required when you decide to treat yourself to something, or save a little more 1 month for a trip you are planning, or simply choose how your money moves through your days. But beyond logistics, there is something deeply and powerfully psychological about a woman knowing that she is capable of taking care of herself financially. For many women over 65, managing their own finances is the first time they have ever done it. They were raised by fathers who handled money and taught them, through silence and assumption, that numbers were not their domain. They were married to husbands who took over the finances and whose authority over money was never seriously questioned in either direction. And so they arrived at 65, sometimes widowed, sometimes divorced, sometimes simply alone, by having never once balanced a checkbook on their own authority. And then they do it, and then they learn, and then something happens that the research tracks, but that no one talks about nearly enough. Confidence, real, grounded, deeply personal confidence, not the performed confidence of a woman pretending to be fine. The genuine, quiet confidence of a woman who did something hard, something she was told she could not do, something she never imagined she would need to do, and found out that she could, that she was capable, that it was in her all along. And that confidence does not stay inside the checkbook. It spreads. Women who master their own finances report feeling more confident in family dynamics, more willing to speak up when they are being talked over, more able to hold their own ground with adult children or doctors or anyone else who has historically assumed they needed someone else to make the decisions. The financial competence becomes personal competence, and personal competence for women who spent decades in a kind of quiet dependency feels like liberation, because it is. I think of a woman I will call Susan. She was 67, living in a suburb of Minneapolis. Her husband had managed their finances for the entirety of their 40-year marriage. She had a credit card for household purchases, but she did not know their bank account numbers or their balances or how much their mortgage payment was each month. When her husband died, she was terrified. She called her daughter in tears and said, "I don't know how to do any of this. I have never done any of this." Her daughter came over and they sat together at the kitchen table with all the papers spread out, and Susan said that sitting there was one of the most frightening moments of her adult life, and also, quietly and strangely, one of the most alive. She learned everything. She took a financial literacy class at her local community center. She met with a financial advisor. She set up her own online accounts and learned to read her own statements. And 18 months later, she called her daughter and she was crying again, but differently. She said, "I paid off my car. Just me. I did that myself. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Her daughter cried too. And then Susan said something her daughter has never forgotten. She said, "Why did nobody ever tell me I could do this? Why did nobody tell me I was capable of this? All this time, I was capable of this." That question is the one so many women over 65 are asking right now in bank offices and community centers and at kitchen tables all across America. Why did nobody tell me I could do this? The answer is complicated and worth a whole separate video. But the more important answer, the one that matters today, is this: you can, you always could, and now you know it. The seventh reason is one that researchers call purpose density, and it is in many ways at the very heart of the entire story we are telling today. Purpose density means how many sources of genuine meaning and engagement you have woven into the fabric of your daily life. A woman with high purpose density has multiple reasons to get up in the morning that are entirely her own. Her friendships, her creative pursuits, her volunteer work at the local food pantry or the hospital reading program, her faith community and the relationships inside it, her grandchildren and the particular joy of that bond on her own terms, her garden, her reading group, her morning walk on the route she has walked 1,000 times and still loves. Each of these is a thread of meaning, and together They create something dense and rich and deeply satisfying. A life that feels full in the ways that actually matter. Research consistently shows that women over 65 who live alone have, on average, higher purpose density than women living with a partner. And the reason is counterintuitive enough that I want to make sure it lands properly. A partner can reduce purpose density, not through any cruelty or intent, not because love is not real, but simply because a partner takes up space, emotional space, time space. The space of attention and energy and daily management that two people sharing a life inevitably require of each other. When you have someone at home whose moods affect yours, whose needs you are constantly and lovingly anticipating, whose presence shapes the rhythm of every day, there is measurably less of you available for everything else. The research is clear on this. It is simply a matter of where the energy goes. Women living alone do not have that dynamic. They have the full width and depth of their daily lives available for building purpose. And they use it. They volunteer more, they join more community groups, they take more classes, they travel more, they invest more in their grandchildren on their own schedule, on their own terms. They read more, create more, connect more, experience more. They are, in a very specific and measurable way, more alive in the texture of their ordinary days. And ordinary days are where happiness actually lives. Not in the milestones, not in the anniversaries and the celebrations and the big moments, in the Tuesday afternoon book club at the library, in the Thursday morning water aerobics class where you know everyone by name, in the Saturday evening when you cooked something you have never cooked before and it turned out beautifully and you ate it at your own table and felt, for no dramatic reason, genuinely proud, in the Sunday phone call with a friend who has known you for 40 years and still makes you laugh until you have to catch your breath. Happiness lives in the density of a life rich with meaning. And the data is clear. For women over 65 who choose independence and build it with intention, that density is available in full measure, every day, in the ordinary, irreplaceable texture of a life that is genuinely and completely yours. The eighth reason is the spiritual one. And I want to handle it carefully because it is deeply personal, but it is also real and it is documented, and it belongs in this conversation. Many women over 65 living alone describe a deepening of their spiritual life that they did not anticipate, did not plan for, and would not trade for anything they can name. Whether they are women of faith in the traditional sense, who attend their church every Sunday morning and pray before they sleep, or women whose spirituality is more personal and interior, more connected to nature and stillness and the deep quiet of early morning, they describe the same experience. The solitude of living alone has given them a quality of inner access they never had before. They hear themselves more clearly. They know what they believe with greater certainty and less performance. They feel more genuinely connected to whatever they call the sacred. They pray with more focus and less distraction. They sit outside on summer evenings and watch the light change and feel present in that experience in a way that, when there was always someone beside them, was harder to reach. The presence of another person, however beloved, divides attention in ways so subtle and so constant, we do not even notice them until they are gone. For women of faith particularly, living alone has often been the condition under which their faith became the most real it has ever been. In the solitude, there is nothing else to fill the interior space, and what fills it instead is something old and quiet and true that was there all along, waiting for the noise to soften enough to be heard. I do not think this is an accident. I think the solitude of a life lived alone creates a specific kind of interior spaciousness that is genuinely difficult to access when you are always in relationship with someone else's needs and moods and rhythms. Every great spiritual tradition has known this. Every great spiritual tradition includes at its heart some version of silence, retreat, the removal of external noise so that the deepest interior truth can surface. Women over 65 who live alone are, in a very real sense, living inside that retreat. Every morning is a morning of space. Every evening is an evening of stillness. And the women who lean into that stillness, who allow it to be what it is rather than rushing to fill it, are often report finding there something they can only describe as the deepest peace of their lives. The ninth reason is the most forward-looking, and it is perhaps the most empowering thing I will say today. Women over 65 who live alone and who have built rich, purposeful, connected lives are not in decline. They are not in a waiting room, marking time until something changes or someone arrives. They are building something real and deliberate and entirely their own. And the skills they are developing in the building of it, the self-knowledge and the confidence and the social richness and the purpose density and the daily competence and the hard-won peace are the exact skills that predict well-being and vitality across the full remainder of a human life. They are the women who decide on a Wednesday morning to take the painting class they have always wanted to take, and who pick up the phone that afternoon and book it. They are the women who plan the trip to see the autumn leaves in New England, who make the reservation, who pack their own bag, who drive themselves to the airport, who sit on the plane with a novel they chose entirely for themselves and feel, somewhere around 30,000 feet over Ohio, like the freest human being on the entire plane. They are the women who invite their 5 dearest friends to dinner and cook the whole meal and set the table with the china they never used when it had to be saved for important occasions, because they have decided quietly and firmly that every occasion shared with people they love is an important occasion. They are the women who read all night when they want to, who sleep late when they need to, who cry when they need to and laugh when they want to and make decisions, small ones and enormous ones, entirely on their own clear authority. And the research shows that these women are not just happier in the present moment. They are building lives that will continue to nourish them into their 70s, their 80s, and beyond. They are investing right now in their own future selves, and what they are building will compound over time the way all genuine investment does. Not the investment of money, the investment of becoming, of knowing yourself so well and living so fully and connecting so richly that the years ahead hold no real threat, just more life, more discovery, more Tuesday mornings with the jazz playing and the window open and the particular, wonderful, irreplaceable feeling of being completely at home in yourself. That is the revolution, and it is already happening all across America, in the living rooms and the kitchens and the morning walks and the evening silences of women over 65 who chose themselves or were brought to themselves by circumstance and found on the other side of everything they feared, not emptiness, wholeness. I want to stop here for a moment, right here in the space between the data and the practical steps, because there is something I need to say directly to you, and I want to say it slowly, and I want you to really let it in. You were told a story about yourself. You were told it from the time you were very small, and it was reinforced by every movie and every book and every conversation you were ever part of. And by the time you were an adult, it had become something you believed so deeply you did not even know it was a story anymore. It had simply become what felt like the truth. The story said, a woman alone is a woman who failed. A woman alone is a woman who was left, or who chose wrong, or who was somehow not enough to make love stay. A woman alone is incomplete. She is half of something that did not happen, or half of something that ended. She is waiting in some essential and fundamental way for someone to come along and make her life begin again. And I want to tell you today, with everything I have and with the full weight of the research and the full weight of the real lives of real women behind me, that this story was a lie. It was not your truth. It was never the truth. See, it was a story that served a particular era and a particular social arrangement, and that era is over. And that story, you can put it down now. You are allowed to set it down gently right here and walk away from it and never pick it up again. Because here is what is true. A woman over 65 who is living her own life on her own terms, making her own decisions and keeping her own counsel and honoring the wisdom she has spent 65 or 70 or 75 years earning, is not incomplete. She is not half of something. She is not waiting. She is, if anything, more whole than she has ever been in her life, more herself than she has ever been allowed to be. She is not a woman who was left. She is a woman who arrived. And there is a difference so vast between those two things. And once you feel it, once it settles into you, the way a truth settles, quiet and certain and unmovable, you will never again confuse them. You will never again look at your life and see absence where there is fullness. You will never again hear the quiet of your own home and call it loneliness. You arrived to your own life, to your own mornings and your own decisions, and your own full authority over who you are and how you spend your days. You arrive to the truest and most complete version of yourself that has ever existed. And the only thing that was ever standing between you and this arrival, the only thing, was the story you were told. Put it down. Walk away from it. You do not need it anymore. You never did. Now let me give you something practical, because understanding the why is powerful, but the how is what changes the actual texture of your days. And I want you to leave this video with specific, real, actionable things you can begin this very week. The first thing I want to invite you to try is what I call the morning claim. It is very simple. It takes less than 5 minutes. And the women who build this practice consistently into their lives describe it as quietly transformative in ways that surprise them. Every morning before you do anything else, before you check your cell phone or turn on the television or begin any task, sit quietly for 3 to 5 minutes. And in that quiet, ask yourself one single question. What is one thing I want today? Not what do I need to accomplish? Not what does someone else need from me? What do I want? One thing. It can be genuinely small. A particular walk before the light changes. A phone call with someone whose voice you love. An hour with a book you have been meaning to return to. A piece of music you have not heard in months. One thing. Write it down if that feels helpful. And then, at some point that day, honor it. This seems almost embarrassingly simple. But for women who have spent decades organizing their days entirely around what other people needed, the daily practice of asking what you want and then treating that want as worthy of being honored is not a small act. It is the practice of reclaiming your own life, and it compounds. After 1 month, you know yourself a little better than before. After 1 year, you know yourself deeply. You know what restores you and what drains you. You know where your joy lives and what closes it off. You know with quiet confidence who you are. And for women over 65, that knowledge is worth more than almost anything else in the world. The second thing is what I call the connection calendar. Take out a calendar, paper, or your cell phone, whatever you prefer, and choose 3 standing social appointments for the coming month. Not grand plans, not events that require significant expense or complicated arranging. 3 simple, repeated, low-stakes social moments that you commit to and protect as you would protect any important appointment. A standing Tuesday lunch with a friend who makes you feel like yourself. A Wednesday evening phone call with your sister or a childhood friend. A monthly walk with the woman from your faith community you always mean to spend more time with. Put them in the calendar, protect them. When they come, be fully present. The research on female friendship and longevity is not a gentle suggestion. It is a prescription for how long you live and how well. Female friendship at this stage of life is one of the most powerful health interventions available to you, and it is free. And it is waiting, and all it requires is the decision to protect the time and show up fully when you do. The women who do this consistently are the women the data shows thriving in their 80s. They did not get lucky, they made a choice. And now you can too. The third thing is what I call the competence project. Pick one thing, just one, that you have historically depended on someone else for, and learn to do it yourself this month. It does not have to be large or impressive. So it just has to be something that, once you know how to do it on your own, will give you a small but genuine and real surge of personal power. Learn to reset your Wi-Fi router. Learn to read your own investment statements. Cook the recipe you have always wanted to make but never attempted. Call the repair person yourself and talk through what needs to be done without handing the phone to anyone else. Learn to use the features on your cell phone that have always confused you. One thing, be small enough to actually do, real enough to actually matter, because the point is never the skill itself. The point is the experience of acquiring it, the experience of discovering again and again that you are more capable than you were told, that the edges of what you can handle extend further than anyone led you to believe. Every single time a woman over 65 does something she has never done before, something she handled alone, something she figured out on her own authority, she is depositing into an account that cannot be emptied, the account of knowing who she is and what she can do. And that account, built steadily over months and years, becomes the foundation of a self-confidence that does not waver, the kind that does not need anyone else's permission to exist. The fourth thing is to build what I call your anchor. An anchor is a place, a time, a ritual, a practice, or a simple recurring activity that is entirely and only yours. Something that belongs to you, the way your own name belongs to you. A chair in the corner of your living room where you read every evening at the same hour. A garden bed you tend on Saturday mornings with your coffee going cold beside you. A walk on a particular route at sunset where you know every house and every tree. A recipe you make only for yourself on Sunday afternoons, for no special occasion except that you love it. A journal you write in before sleep. Whatever it is, it should feel, when you return to it, like coming home to yourself. Anchors matter because they create continuity. They create a thread through the weeks and months of your life that says, I was here. I am here. I know how to come back to myself when the world gets loud or the grief comes back or the loneliness visits, as it sometimes does, honestly, as it sometimes does for everyone. My anchor is there, and I know the way. The fifth thing is to tell the truth. Specifically, the truth you might be afraid to say out loud, perhaps even to yourself. The truth that this life, this alone life, this life that looks from a certain angle like something you might need to be rescued from, is actually a life you are choosing. Because you are choosing it every day you wake up in it and take one deliberate step toward making it richer. Every day you make a decision on your own authority. Every day you feel the particular and irreplaceable satisfaction of a morning that belongs completely to you. Tell that truth. To yourself first, in the quiet of your own kitchen, in the language you use when no one is listening. And then, if you are ready, to the women in your life who are walking their own version of this path. Because the truth that one woman speaks out loud, plainly and without apology, has the power to change the story for every woman within earshot. There are women all around you who are still holding the old story, still feeling like failures, still waiting to be rescued, still believing that alone means empty, that their life doesn't fully count until there is someone else in it to witness it. Show them your full life. Show them your full self, not by arguing or convincing, not by giving speeches, just by living it fully in the daylight. With your chin up and your choices made and your mornings claimed and your jazz playing and your window open. That is the revolution. One full, honest, unashamed life at a time. Remember how this began. Something quietly extraordinary is happening among women over 65 across America right now, and now you understand something about it that most people do not. Now you understand that the happiness the research is measuring is not a consolation prize. It is not making the best of a situation that could have gone better. It is not a polite word for survival. It is the life, the actual, full, genuine, deeply human life that becomes available to a woman when she is finally, at long last, the primary person in her own story, not the supporting character who adjusts and accommodates and waits. The primary person, the one whose preferences shape the morning, the one whose values fill the house, the one whose name is on the lease and the decision and the day. That woman, the woman you are becoming or have already become, is not alone in any way that truly matters. She is accompanied at every moment by every version of herself she has ever been, by every love she has ever given and received, by every lesson that cost her something to learn, by every morning she got up when it was hard, and every evening she chose herself when it would have been easier not to. She carries all of it, as she is made of all of it, and she walks through her days with a fullness that the world for a very long time told her was not possible for a woman in her situation. And she knows quietly and completely that not only is it possible, it is hers. I hope this video gave you something real today, something you can take into the rest of your week, something that shifts just gently and permanently how you see your own extraordinary life. Share this with a woman in your life who needs to hear it today.